Who is my neighbor? That is the question posed to Jesus. Who is my neighbor? When as children we heard this story and this question, we thought that that man must have been awfully stupid if he didn't even know who his neighbor was. Who is your neighbor? Well, we knew exactly who our neighbors were. They were Mr. and Mrs. Rath, who lived in the house next door. We used to call them Grandma and Grandpa, and they would send over homemade plum dumplings and other delights from their kitchen. They were our neighbors, and neighbors were, well, sort of family. In the house on the other side were wonderful neighbors too, a retired firefighter and his wife. They had the most delicious tomatoes growing in their backyard, and when they were ripe, we all shared in them. They were neighbors. Another house was conveniently located for the children to cut through the yard to get to school as a shortcut. So everybody did, and that was just fine with her. These were neighbors. Who is my neighbor? We all knew our neighbors. We had a big cherry tree in our yard, and when the cherries were nice and red, the whole neighborhood could come and pick them and use them for their pies. Those were neighbors. Those were good memories. Then a long time ago I came to California, to a completely different sort of neighborhood, and I was astonished to see that when you asked people who their neighbors were, they had no idea what the neighbors looked like, and no idea what their names were. Everyone had huge, high fences that you couldn't see through. They were called privacy fences. I actually came to like them after a while because I discovered that you could go sunbathing in any state of undress without worrying about the neighbors. Those privacy fences were meant to keep neighbors from each other and to keep them from getting to know one another. Then I moved to the barrio, in the inner city. Oh, we certainly had neighbors there. I knew exactly who our neighbors were, because every warm weekend night they would throw parties, all of them, until the wee hours of the morning, with the loudest music I had ever heard. Years later, I came to yet a different neighborhood, and that was another experience altogether. Some of you will remember the old television show Bewitched. You remember the crabby old neighbor lady, Mrs. Kravitz? We had a lot of those near the church. They know everyone's business, and they are quite interested in it. One complained every time the church bells would ring, while another seemed to hate living across the street from a school. It was quite a collection. We all have experiences of different sorts of neighbors. When we hear that question, who is my neighbor? How do we answer? Jesus answered it by telling a story, which is always a good thing to do. In fact, he gave us at this point one of the most well-known and beloved stories of all time, the story of the Good Samaritan. That term, Good Samaritan, is so popular that it has entered our language. We talk about people being good Samaritans when they do good deeds for people they don't even know. The famous Russian author Leo Tolstoy told another version of this story. It is a story of two Russians going on a pilgrimage to the Holy Land. Now, back in those days, you did not step onto a plane and land over there in a matter of hours. No, it was a very long and arduous journey on foot, by horse, by mule, or anything that was available. It was quite a sacrifice. These two pilgrims set off for Jerusalem. And on the way they came to a territory where there was a famine and great poverty. They stopped outside a poor little family hut, and one of them went in to see if they could get some water, while the other waited outside. The one who went inside saw that this poor family was starving to death. He took pity on them, and instead of continuing on to Jerusalem, he gave them everything he had. He stayed with them and took care of them, nursing them back to health, feeding and clothing them. Meanwhile, the other man, tired of waiting for his companion, decided to go on alone to Jerusalem. When he arrived there, he went to the church of the Holy Sepulchre. To his amazement, he found his friend there, praying at the tomb of Christ. And he thought, how can this be? How could this man possibly have gotten here before I did? Then he realized his friend was not there at all. God had sent him a vision of his friend praying at the holy tomb in order to teach him that an act of love and kindness is worth much more than any prayer or pilgrimage. This is the Good Samaritan. This is someone who discovered who his neighbor was and became a neighbor himself. Who is my neighbor? The answer is very clear from both these beautiful stories. Our neighbor doesn't have to live next door to us. Our neighbor doesn't even have to be someone we know. Our neighbor is anyone in need of our smile, our good word, our open heart, and sometimes our open wallet. There are many neighbors out there. Who are they? They don't have to live on the same block. We are all sharing this same planet, and this planet is getting smaller and smaller all the time. Who is my neighbor? Open your eyes and you will see one. Open your heart and you will become one.